Job 19:21 to 29. Have pity on me, my friends, have pity, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you pursue me as God does? Will you never get enough of my flesh? Oh, that my words were recorded and that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead, or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. If you say, how we will hound him, since the root of the trouble lies in him, you should fear the sword yourselves. For wrath will bring punishment by the sword, and then you will know that there is judgment. This is how the book of Job begins. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. Job 1 verse 1. And this is how the book of Job starts. Job is blameless and upright. He fears God and shuns evil. Job is also wealthy. Verse 2. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the east. Job 1, 2 to 3. And then Satan comes to God in the heavenly court. He tells God that Job is blameless and upright because God has blessed him with an abundance of possessions. Take away all his possessions and he will curse you, God. And so God allows Satan to do this. Job loses his children and his wealth. And then this is how Job responds to it. Job 1 verse 20 onwards. At these, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all these, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Job 1 verses 20 to 22. The name Satan means accuser or prosecutor. So in Job 2, Satan tries to make life even more difficult for Job. He now wants to afflict Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. God allows him. Job takes a piece of broken pottery and scrapes himself as he sits among the ashes. And his wife says to him, Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. He replies, You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. So now Job is deprived of 3 things that matter a lot to him or any human being. He has lost his children, that is, he has lost his loved ones. He has lost his material possessions, the sheep, the camels, the oxen, the donkeys, and the servants. And number 3, he has lost his physical health. He has sores from head to toe. And then his 3 friends come into the picture. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite go to him and try to comfort him. For the first 7 days, they are very quiet with him. They sit and weep with him. Then the loss gets too much for Job. He starts to curse the day he was born. May the day of my birth perish. May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said a boy is conceived. In other words, Job is very bitter about his life. And so now when we come to Job chapter 19, which is the passage we are reading right now, Job continues this theme. Why do I suffer? Was I born to suffer? Why must I suffer? Why does God allow suffering? Is God just? If God is just and I am upright, why are these things taken away from me? And after their initial silence, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, his 3 friends, try to find the answers to Job's dilemma. Why does God allow suffering? And they cannot find an answer to the dilemma. This is the most difficult part of the central part of Job. They cannot proceed. During this time, they proceed to lecture Job about how he should respond to God, and they make his sense of grief and loss even worse. Peter Jackson is the producer of and director of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy. He lives in New Zealand. His father was a soldier in World War One, and after that the father moved from England to New Zealand, or the family moved from England to New Zealand. Peter grew up with stories and pictures of the war. His father had books and pictures. Then in 2015, some pictures of World War I were made available to him by the Imperial War Museum for an exhibition to celebrate the Battle of Gallipoli. And these pictures were colorized. After that, the Imperial War Museum asked Peter Jackson if he could do a documentary based on the 100 hours of archival footage preserved from World War I. Peter agreed, and the result is They Shall Not Grow Old, which was released in the cinemas here in Canada early this year, 2019. Peter was not satisfied with just showing the black and white footage. He felt that he should digitize and colorize some of the footage. My son Luke and I saw the movie early this year. Yes, the first part of the movie had the archival footage, and which was pretty jumpy, like all movies preserved from that era. And then the movie moves into a digitized and colorized mode. On top of that, the Imperial War Museum allowed access to 600 hours of oral interviews collected from 250 veterans of World War I. And Peter used these interviews to explain the film. This is what Peter says about the film. The humanity of the people on the film jumps out at you, especially the faces. They are no longer buried in a fog of film grain and scratches and stuttering and sped up footage. This became the first World War film I was waiting all these years to make. And then there are clips in the movie from Sunken Lane just before the Battle of the Somme, July 1st, 1916. And during the production, Peter took his unit to Sunken Lane. Come on, we are going to the Western Front and have a look. And Peter says, I can't tell you how harrowing it was in that exact spot to walk up over the bank, and just as the Lancashire Fusiliers had done. And you go up over the top, over that bank, and walk down about 100 meters, and there's a cemetery. And the majority of those guys we see in the footage are buried there, because very few of them survived. So the soldiers who died in the Battle of the Somme lost everything: loved ones, possessions, and health. And there is just no way to express their sense of loss. Remembrance Sunday, which is tomorrow, which is this particular weekend, and the book of Job go hand in hand. Job suffers the loss of loved ones, the loss of possessions, the loss of health, and we remember them every day, our military personnel and their families who went through war. They also experienced the loss of loved ones, the loss of possessions, and the loss of health. We observe Remembrance Sunday every year. We also have frames at the back of our sanctuary to remember those who served in World War I and World War II. And we have films like They Shall Not Grow Old to remind us of the huge sacrifice they and their families made for their countries. But I'd like to ask us some questions. Is the loss of loved ones only experienced in war and by Job? Is the loss of possessions only experienced in war and by Job? Is the loss of health only experienced in war and by Job? If we were to be honest, we will find that in our life battles, we also experience the loss of loved ones, the loss of possessions, and the loss of health. Life is tough. Life is difficult. We deal with losses in our life. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamanite, Job's three friends, try to find the answer to Job's dilemma. At the end of the day, Job and his friends are frustrated because they cannot find a satisfactory answer to the question, why does God allow suffering? And the conclusion as you read the book of Job is that suffering happens, period, if you are a human being. And suffering also happens to you if you are a blameless and upright person like Job. However, Job 19 gives a partial solution. His solution does not totally satisfy us because it does not give a philosophical answer to the question, why does God allow suffering? Instead, Job gives a practical solution. Pain and suffering exists, but how do we face it? Job 19:25-27. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. Yes, Job has lost his children. Yes, Job has lost his livestock. Yes, Job has lost his health. Life is difficult and pain and suffering exist. But Job is certain that God is with him, even though God might have allowed Satan to take away his children, his livestock, and his health. He calls God his Redeemer. This means whatever bad Job experiences in life, he believes God will redeem the situation. God will bring the good out of the bad. And Job might not understand what is happening in his life right now, but one day after his skin is destroyed, as he describes it, yet in his flesh he will see God. And when he sees God, then God will give him the answers, finally, as to why when he was on this earth, he experienced so much pain and suffering. And until that day, Job will persevere. So, is God just above in the throne of heaven, merely discussing the fate of Job with Satan in the heavenly court? Is God with Job as he suffers the loss in his life? In our Apostles' Creed that we recite at communion, we have these words: Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. Jesus was crucified, died, and was buried. Jesus descended into the dead. Other translations say Jesus descended into hell. Jesus is the Son of God. In other words, Jesus is God who becomes a human being, and God takes on human flesh and blood like us. God has lost a loved one. He loses his son on the cross. And Jesus certainly didn't have much livestock like Job. He moved from place to place in Israel and Galilee with only sandals in his feet. And finally, Jesus had his hands and feet nailed on the cross. He had his side pierced. He wore a crown of thorns. Therefore, God is present with us when we suffer, whether in war or in life's battles like Job. God has experienced the loss of loved ones. God has experienced the loss of possessions. God has experienced the loss of health. Hebrews 2:18. Because he suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. And the Greek word for tempted can also be translated as tested. Therefore, as Jesus has suffered being tested, he is able to help us when we are tested for our faith. So Hebrews 2:18 can read like this: because he himself suffered when he was tested, he is able to help those who are being tested. Hebrews 2:18. Thank you.